Hello, I'm John Harrison. Good to see you again. Today we're going to look at this city from the point of view of how we foreigners see it. Right now we're in one of the most beautiful streets of Moscow on Nikolsky. It's got something European about it. The same attractive shops, same wide pedestrian zone, the same bright decorations. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of a main shopping street in the capital of Austria. But I wonder, what else has Moscow got in common with other cities of the world apart from its shopping streets?
The text of the good old song about the brotherhood of two great states is still relevant today, just as back then there was no firmer bond. The unity of nations and races is growing stronger. And now we'll speak to Sergei Sanakoyev, the president of the Russian-Chinese Analytical Center.
Today, they are the two most leading countries with high levels of interaction, Russia and China. There are probably no other precedents in history. We are equally looking at all the situations that are happening around the world, whether regional problems, such as with North Korea or Iran, or security issues, drug trafficking, or ecology.
2 years ago, the government of Moscow and the People's Government of Beijing celebrated the 20th anniversary of establishing partnerships. This resulted in signing a memorandum of cooperation and friendly exchange for 2016-2018. This year, a diplomatic document was signed for another 2 years. Now let's talk to Sergei Cheryomin, a minister of the Moscow government, head of the Department for External, Economic and International Relations of the Moscow government.
Russia and China are neighbors, but the key role in the fact that Russia-Chinese relations are developing so dynamically was played by the friendship between our countries during the middle of the 20th century. The Chinese remember very well who helped them become a great industrial power.
The historic event took place within the framework of Days of Moscow in Beijing. Chinese people admit that these were some of the most vivid and memorable days during the final days of the year. Days of Moscow in Beijing is not merely an opportunity to get acquainted with Russian culture. For many, this is a chance to be back in real Moscow, to taste rye bread or sing a favorite song. The most colorful performances took place on the main street, Wang Fujin. It is also referred to as the Beijing Arbat. Here, citizens of Beijing could leave an autograph at a special stand, sample authentic Moscow cuisine, and even paint a plate. But the main gift was waiting for the residents of Beijing in Chaoyang Central Park. The Moscow Corner was opened there with a traditional Russian toy. We shall now speak to Ilya Kuzmin, the Deputy Head of the Department of Foreign Economic and International Relations of Moscow.
We could not remain without a gift because in 2015, as my colleague correctly noted, a monument was established in Gorky Park in the context of a partnership when we celebrated the 20th anniversary between Moscow and Beijing. And when we were preparing these days, we asked the residents of Beijing what they wanted to see in their park. And they said it was the national symbol, the Matryoshka.
Besides the long-term friendship and productive cooperation, every year Beijing and Moscow are finding more and more new points of economic development. The two main focuses are tourism and new technologies. Experts summed up the ending year, and it turned out that Chinese citizens took first place among all foreign guests visiting Moscow. In 6 months, Chinese tourists made almost 374,000 trips to the capital as Russia as part of tourist groups, which is 20% more than last year. As a famous song goes, Moscow, Beijing, people go, go forward for the path of light, for lasting peace. Thousands of Muscovites will return to visit the capital of the Celestial Empire in 2022. The main goal will be the support of our athletes during their fight for gold medals in the Winter Olympics. And now we'll speak to Nikolai Gulyaev, the head of the Sports and Tourism Department of the Moscow government.
Traditionally, the Moscow delegation takes part in the context of the Days of Moscow, and vice versa, with many cities of the world. We regularly go to Korea, China, Moscow, Beijing, Moscow, Seoul Games, Germany, Italy, and just recently our athletes returned from Tashkent and Belarus. Right now, literally a few days later, the arrival of the Israeli sports delegation is planned, albeit just a small group. But that is the first visit. And the exchange of sports delegations and experience and our specialists takes place on an ongoing basis. I will not list all the countries and cities that are involved in this process, so as not to upset anyone. And believe me, it would take a long time. We have very extensive international cooperation programs in place, because Moscow is open. We have an open city. Moscow, as you've probably noticed, is more than simply a city. Therefore, in terms of sports, we try to keep up with rapid development, and we are pleased to gain from the experience of our foreign colleagues. And if there is such a need, to also share with them. If someone needs it, in terms of high-performance sports, we have World Championships, various World Cups, as well as European and World Championships on a regular basis. Despite the desire that has recently arisen to limit Russia in terms of holding international competitions, in Moscow, a large number of events are taking place on a permanent basis. We play a very active role in this. And the exchange of sports delegations between Moscow and other cities, specifically cities, not countries, since we play the role of a subject of the Russian Federation, do not represent the Russian national team. Therefore, it is mainly at the level of children. Well, not so small children, as they are 13, 14, 15 years old. These are not adult athletes. These are not national teams of the country. And these are not professional athletes, because they have work to do, and they represent the country at international competitions.
Moscow, it's an open megapolis. It does business with countries and cities the whole world over. Now, I've got somebody I know who would like to perhaps tell us how you can do that and to which projects you'd like to perhaps invest money into.
Now let's talk to Armen Oganessian, the chief editor of the International Life magazine.
The cooperation palette during Days of Moscow is even bigger than for the years of Russia in other countries. The view on Russia is changing, including when the view on Moscow is changing. These Days of Moscow in other countries, of course, share different facets of Moscow's existence. And this, of course, is an important aspect. And in addition, a very important component in this regard is the support of compatriots, because under the conditions of such Russophobia, they're experiencing a certain degree of pressure, of course, whether you want it or not, and they have a background of staying close to Russia. And so they do not feel entirely comfortable. The Days of Moscow helps them. It increases the space around them, and they become filled not only with memories, but with the living culture of Russia. Especially since I said a very important theme, a theme of these Days of Moscow abroad, is the Russian language and Russian culture. Culture is our locomotive, our engine, followed by all the other trailers, even economics and innovations. And by the way, what is very important for Days of Moscow, and this is right, it is important to be clarified, when we talk about investments in Russia and Moscow during these days, there are talks about infrastructure to be invested in. And it is very important to clarify that the Moscow government guarantees the levelling of some non-commercial risks. You understand, yes, what I'm talking about? This is very important because people are afraid sometimes to come with investments in Russia because they worry about these investments being sufficiently guaranteed, and not from a financial, economic point of view, but namely with different side effects. Well, there are lots of myths circulating around about this, but there is truth. That is why it is very important when, in this case, the Moscow government, if we're talking about the days of Moscow, it gives guarantees, clarifies and shows. Here is the matrix of the infrastructure of Moscow. You can apply funds here, invest there, and there's approximately such an economic gain from this, and most importantly, the perspectives of the sphere in which you invest.
"2018 was rich in the days of Moscow abroad. The capital of Russia managed to strengthen friendly and partnership relations with another strategically important country, Uzbekistan. The Days of Moscow in Tashkent was held in the format of business communication. The main event was a conference presentation during which members of the Moscow delegation spoke about the most successful projects which are implemented in the city. Now let's talk to Sergei Cheryomin, a minister of the Moscow government, head of the Department for External, Economic and International Relations of the Moscow government.
Over the past 5 to 6 years, the city has achieved great success in the development of primarily transport infrastructure. Therefore, the International Transport Congress awarded Moscow 1 year ago first place in the development of public transport in the world. And the World Bank placed Moscow and the Russian Federation, namely Moscow and St. Petersburg, in 35th place in its ratings. I want to note that 6 years ago, we were in 120th place. The city plans to be in 20th place by 2020. Moscow, actively developing its economy, has shown that the city is attractive for investors. And, for example, Foreign Direct Investment magazine this year awarded Moscow with 7 nominations at once, including the most attractive city in Eastern Europe in terms of investment.
Moscow and Tashkent are similar. Both capitals are actively developing, focusing on the most important areas of city life. And I will talk to Sharof Rakhmanov, the Deputy Hakim of Tashkent, on investment, innovation, development of industry, tourism and assistance to privatized enterprises.
We, like Moscow, want to move away from the center of rapid development of the city and transition to polycentric development. And we are taking a number of specific decisions aimed at the development of industrial and peripheral zones, and to institute a range of solutions for more convenient living and working.
In the future, both capitals hope to develop not only the creativity of cities, but also high technologies. Between Moscow and Tokyo, there's an almost 7,500 kilometer distance. But Muscovites and Japanese don't need to definitely travel all that distance to understand each other's culture and traditions.
And for some, this city, it's beautiful and wealthy. For others, it's grey and even a little bit dangerous. But one thing's for sure, this place is a city of contrasts. Muscovites, they like to receive people, they're very welcoming. But at the same time, they like to travel, they like to be abroad. And when they come back, they remember these visits and talk about them for a long time.